Hey guys, welcome back to Andy's Dinosaur Reviews, and today we are checking out another Beasts of the Mesozoic figure. However, this time we are really going back to the beginnings of the Beasts of the Mesozoic with the Raptor series, but this is one of the most, if not the most, rare raptor in the series. This one was sold out fairly quickly, I think, and has become quite sought after over time. This is the Balaur bondoc, and this is a figure that I did not grab right away, but had the intentions of grabbing for quite some time. However, like with everything when it comes to the Beasts of the Mesozoic, if you mess around too long and you wait too long, it becomes a nightmare to get a hold of it. So again, I had to pay secondhand prices from somebody that I knew that was actually selling it. It wasn't too much over retail, which was nice. Again, it gave me the opportunity to grab this without spending a fortune. But this one can be pretty pricey to get a hold of at times, and honestly can be a nightmare to search out. But the box art, again, is pretty decent. You've got a really nice image here of the dinosaur over here on the right hand side with the usual sort of slip that goes over it, and then if you turn the box around you can see like a little checklist here on the back that shows off quite a few of the other raptors that are in the series, which if you are familiar with this series you'll know there are quite a few raptors overall. And we can see over here again kind of like a sneak peek of what the information card and everything will look like, along with a really nice image, again some more artwork here of the dinosaur. I believe David Silva had stated he was going to be re-releasing this one at some point with a new color scheme, but I have not heard anything in quite a while on that. I know that was like a year or two ago when I last heard that, but so far no info has come out on that. So if you are interested again in grabbing one of these right now, this is the only version you can get. So I'm going to go ahead, pop this out of the box, and then we'll check the figure out from there. So we do also have some alternate toes in here, which you can see again, kind of like closed toes for the figure. And we also have a base, of course, which if we take the base out, I most times don't really use the bases, but if you bring the base out, you can see it looks pretty good. Of course, I think I'll use it just for the review, but a lot of the time I just kind of stand them up together on a shelf that I have over here. And then here is the actual Balaur figure itself, and honestly, this one is definitely nicer in person than I was expecting it to be. Not that I expected it to be bad, but specifically that really striking blue paint in the face is just gorgeous here in hand. So definitely excited about this one overall, and of course also excited because this is the first time I've ever had the pleasure of adding this species of raptor to my collection, which is definitely, you know, a great day anytime I get to add a new species to my collection. But here, if you start up in the head sculpt, you can see the head sculpt looks really good. Of course, you've got some very impressive fine detail here with some skin texture in the face, and as you move back, you of course pick up the feathering that you would expect to see for the raptor. You can also see the nostrils sculpted out. We do have a dark black tone that moves over the top of the head, and then there's like a tan that's been kind of dry brushed over the snout and also moves down into the lower jaw. In one of the very few instances that I've ever seen, there is a little sloppiness when it comes to the paint on this. You can see a little bit of the pink kind of running out of the mouth here onto the lower jaw, again trailing from the inside of the mouth, but this was basically the Beasts of the Mesozoic in its very, very early days. So I think they've, improved drastically over time when it comes to the paint applications of their figures. So we may see a little sloppiness on this one. I guess we'll just have to wait and see as we go through it. But you can see the eyes are painted with kind of like a reddish brown, and then a nice black pupil, and then there is also a beautiful gloss coat over that, helping it to shine quite realistically. And then we have the gorgeous blues right here that sort of circle around the eye and kind of like stripe out, and man, is that ever striking. And the way it plays off of the darker colors of the body is just fantastic. You can see that moves up and over into the top of the head as well. We do, of course, have an articulated jaw, considering it is a Beasts of the Mesozoic release. On the inside of the mouth, you can see a nice pinkish tone of color. We can see the teeth as well are sculpted and kind of painted a little bit sloppily, but not too bad. Another area that is definitely improved when it comes to these figures over time. Not that this was horrible, but you can see a little bit of sloppiness as you move through the teeth of the figure. But it does look pretty good overall. The fine detail is absolutely excellent, including moving back there into the back of the throat. And we do have an articulated tongue, which you can see the joint right there as well, which again I've gone over previously in other videos of these raptors. It's just hard to get that tongue and move it. I always lose it. It's such a pain to try to get the tongue. Basically, you know, the tongue is articulated. I don't need to pull that out and show it to you again. But as you move back into the body, again, you pick up some very impressive feather detail throughout, a little variation of brown that shows up briefly right here as well as some greens that, like, again, is just super subtle up here on the top of the head. But moving down, again, I think it looks pretty decent. Great as far as the actual sculpt goes, but pretty decent as far as the paint apps. You do, of course, have a few areas of articulation as you move down the neck, and a few, I think this one here might be a floater section, maybe, I forget exactly, but I do know that it allows for some really nice, impressive posability. Definitely as far as left and right goes. Up and down, you don't have as much. You can see, again, it is a little limited. I don't know if I could get it further than that. I don't really want to force it, but I remember the raptors, and even still to this day when it comes to most of the theropods, the up and down motion is definitely a bit limited on the beasts of the Mesozoic. But when it comes to left and right, you know, these raptors had a pretty good range of movement for that articulation. But as you move down into the body, you start to see kind of like a light lime sort of green tone pick up here and move over the back. Again, the paint application isn't super impressive. It definitely looks a little bit more like paint than body color, but it's not too bad. But I do really quite like the fact that that green kind of trails off and has like a nice dry brushing effect over the feathers down here on the side of the body, and that really highlights those feathers quite nicely. I do like that. As we move down into the arm, you can see the arm looks pretty good as far as the feathers go down here as well. We also have a few kind of white feathers popping up in the back of the arm, and then moving down into the massive area here of plumage on the arm, you can see more of that white kind of running along up here, and then kind of dry brushing some of the larger feathers out as you move down, and that definitely has caused the feather detail to pop, which you can see, and shows you again just how highly detailed the actual feathers of this figure is. Like, it is absolutely gorgeous when it comes to the fine detail. Arm articulation, you do have the ability to go forward and back, of course, right there. It also can come out away from the body if you want to try to have your dinosaur soar through the air. You also have elbow articulation right there, as well as wrist articulation as you move down. And again, it all goes forward and back very nicely, very smoothly. If we look here on the underside, it'll give you a better feel for the way the articulation works because the feathers aren't really obscuring it. You can see some variation to the colors here on the underside of the arms as well, as we have like a nice light brown, and then we have a really light tannish tone as you move out here with a black highlighting the endings to the feathers as well. We can also see the fingers up here, and you can see the nails have a nice genuine sharp look to them, painted with a glossy black as well. Moving back into the midsection of the raptor, you do of course have that midsection joint like we usually have. Not a whole lot of range of movement in that area either, but it does add a little extra to the figures. As you move back here into the hip region, again you can see the green feathers there moving along the top. I will say this definitely looks a bit awkward with the way that the legs are applied. I feel like would be a lot smoother if we were sculpting a figure out now in the beasts of the Mesozoic compared to what we had seen back then, because this just does look a little bit awkward overall. But as you move down here into the thigh, you can see the feather detail becomes a lot finer as you move down here. You also again have the black and then the lighter tones here on the back of the thigh. As you lead down into the calf, a very different style of feather detail down here compared to what we saw up in the thigh. And then moving down into the foot, we do of course return back to a skin texture for the dinosaur. But another thing that's really cool, first of all, we have a nice yellowish tone for the foot sculpt, and we also have like a brown dry brushing, it looks like, that's been run over the foot potentially. But you will also notice one of the biggest trademarks of this species is the extra toe that it has with this very menacing claw, which again is definitely something that you would expect to see on this species. So of course it's nice to see it captured here on this figure from the Beasts of the Mesozoic. And obviously there's some very impressive fine detail within the nails and a nice glossy black that has been added. A little bit of articulation, of course, moving down through the legs. You have the ability to move the leg forward and back, also out away from the body a little bit. You as well have the knee forward and back, and that can swivel as well. And then moving down, you've got the ankle forward and back. I don't think these swivel back then. No, it's definitely a very different style compared to what we would see now. And then moving down further, you also have a little spot right here, and then you can swivel the toes, and you can also pull those toes off and replace them with the other toes. On top of that, you can also articulate the sickle claw forward and back, and you can actually articulate this toe as well, which is super cool, and again allows some massive posability on this figure. And then moving up into the tail, you can see the tail again actually leads upward, and that's because you can pull this off and actually push it into a different section that kind of allows the tail to kind of come down more so than up. You do have the different opportunities to pose the tail how you would like in that section, but you can see again a little articulation in that spot, basically mostly just swiveling, it looks like. Kind of a little left and right, but not a whole lot. And then you also have another spot right here which can go left and right and up and down. And the tail is a wire tail, of course, because that was something that you saw through the Beasts of the Mesozoic Raptor series entirely. And as you move out into the tail, again, you've got some pretty decent feather detail, and then a very impressive display of plumage as you lead out there into the ending of the tail with, again, all sorts of lighter and darker tones of color. And then you also see the same thing, but a little bit more bland on the underside, of course, because you just basically have the lighter tones moving along the underside of the dinosaur as you move through, all the way back up into the underside of the stomach, where we transition away from that kind of light tan back to the black, but you do have some of the light brown kind of dry brushed over the stomach before completely disappearing as you lead into the throat. And of course, being a Beasts of the Mesozoic figure, it's going to look the same from one side to the other, because this figure is, of course, a superposable figure, so it would be up to you to sort of display one side differently from the other. But everything again looks pretty precise, pretty much the same on this side as what we had seen on the first side. As far as the base goes, you do have a nice little earthy area here, again with some variation of color, different shades of lighter and darker browns, and like some really light tans. You've also got greens and stuff, helping to give it a little bit of a vegetation sort of a look throughout, and some very nice texturing throughout the base as well. And of course, you've got this little spot right here to put the peg into, basically to hold the raptor up and display it. So pretty fun base for the figure. So I'm going to go ahead, put the peg in, and then we'll stand our raptor up. And actually, just in case you were curious, you can stand the raptor on its own, but mostly because these feathers of the arm kind of can touch and help to, position the raptor up. But if you want any sort of like crazy dramatic poses, I don't think you're going to be able to achieve that with the raptor standing entirely on its own until you throw it up on the base. And I'm always so bad at this. Until you throw it up on the base and kind of get it in a some sort of position where it can be propped up, because the legs do often buckle. The articulation of a lot of the earlier raptors were kind of loose, so when you would stand it, it kind of crumbled in the legs. They've improved that drastically now on the newer raptors, but back then it was a little bit loose. So if you do snag this figure, it should have the looser kind of buckling articulation of the legs, because they have not re-released this one so far anyway. Again, even though David Silva did state that there were intentions to do so at some point. But as far as a length on our raptor goes, about 10.5 inches, or around the 17 centimeter mark, so maybe slightly over 10.5 inches. And then for a height, it's really all over the place, for this one. It's up to you how you display it. Right here where the head is, it's about 4.5 inches or 11.5 centimeters. Where the tail is currently, it's just shy of 5.75 inches or 14.5 centimeters. For a size comparison, there is Mr. Papo T-Rex, the Attack Pack Colovosaurus, Robert Muldoon, and the Collect Day human being next to our Balaur. And you can see again, it's got a pretty good size to it. But if you are familiar with the Raptor series figures and you do have some of these 1/6 scale Raptors in your collection, you're going to have a pretty good idea of the size because most of the Raptors do not really differ much in size. So I would say this one sits pretty close to the same size range as most of the other Raptors. But one comparison that I did want to make, I don't feel like we really need many because again, if you are familiar with the Raptor figures, you'll already know roughly what the size of this one is. It may actually be slightly smaller than some of the other Raptors in the same line, but roughly in a very similar size range. But here we have the Articulation from the Beasts of the Mesozoic line next to our Balaur, and you can see again, since this is a newer Raptor figure, I figured this one would be pretty fresh in most people's minds to bring in and compare with the Balaur. So hopefully helping to give you an idea of the fact that again, these newer Raptors with the Utah Raptor and Articulation are a bit larger than this older Balaur. So this Beasts of the Mesozoic super articulated 1/6 scale Balaur bondoc is an honestly really nice figure. First of all, I think the color scheme they've chosen is probably one of my favorites for the line overall. And I mean, when it comes to the Raptors, but that's because it looks very natural, absolutely looks like the type of color I could see, but also the way the blue plays off of the darker tones is just incredibly appealing to me. I think as a whole, the color scheme is really nicely done, and for the most part, the paint application is nicely done as well, with only a little bit of sloppiness in the mouth, and again, some of the paint moving down along the back doesn't look super impressive, but does look pretty decent. The sculpt is absolutely fantastic, sporting incredible fine detail from head to tail. Tons and tons of articulation, which allows posing the figure to be really fun, and of course you can get as creative as you want when it comes to coming up with displays and dioramas and everything for the figure like usual when it comes to these Beasts of the Mesozoic releases. And considering this is an older Raptor, this one did include a base, which a lot of the newer figures usually do not. So if you are interested in grabbing one of these, again, unfortunately they are sold out. They are very hard to find and can be very pricey. So if you happen to see somebody selling one for a good price, make sure you keep this one in mind so you can grab it instantly and add it to your collection. But otherwise, I would say, be on the lookout for it, but hold out hope that David will release a new version of it. Although I don't know if I'd like the new paint variant more so than this one, because again, I really like the color scheme of this one. But either way, if you can find it, definitely worth picking up, so do so. And of course, like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next review. Thanks for watching.